Okay, everybody, welcome to Spring Boot 2 JHipster. A little bit about me. I'm Sendil Kumar. I'm working at Zibia Labs, where we have two products. One is Excel Release, other one is Excel Deploy. It's entirely a DevOps product, and if you want to know more about this stuff, you can just let me know after the talk. I'm also a co-dev team member of JHipster. How many of you here used JHipster before? Okay, we have a couple of hands. Okay. I'm also part of Rust WASM working group. How many of you know about WebAssembly? Okay, we have one. Great. So WebAssembly is running your native code in the browser. You can run Kotlin. You can run Rust, everything inside your browser. And I'm a big open source lover. You can see me in many open source projects I'm contributing to. So welcome to JHipster 5. So still JHipster 4, we have one guy named as JHipster, and he's having an Angular tattoo, so which means the front end is entirely on Angular. But from JHipster 5, we have his brother who's having a React tattoo here, and we have React front end as well as Spring Boot 2 for JHipster 5. So you can choose between whatever you want. So greetings from JavaHipster. It's a completely open source project. A little bit about the project now, and we have more than 10K stats in Java environment. And we have almost 420 plus awesome contributors. And we have more companies that are using JHipster for their production app. These companies include many top technical companies with banks and all those companies who want to get started and go faster. We have more than 200 plus companies that are using it. So what do JHipster do in general? It helps you to develop faster with latest technologies. And also, it gives you higher developer experience because as a developer, you need to have more experience, and it helps you to get on the road faster. And our core focus for JHipster is increasing the experience of developer and also increasing the developer learning, because as JHipster includes a lot of things under the hood, like it has a front end, it has a back end, it has deployment options, it has everything that is required, which helps for developers to learn more about the project. So we like to put it in this way, like it helps the backend developers to get started with front end and go faster. It helps a full stack developer to reduce the amount of boilerplate that you have to do in order to get started and go for your production environment. And we also help you to build easy microservices application. And one core area which JHipster is also focusing is API first development, which means like anybody here used API first development? Okay, so if you haven't used, or if you're going, anybody here using microservices? Okay, we have quite a few hands for microservices. So in microservices world, API first development is kind of needed. If you want, you can try it out, because all your APIs, you can go ahead and develop the APIs and then go ahead and run your application. And in fact, JHipster microservices itself is based on API first development, and also it has gateway based architecture, which we will see later if you have time. So what do we generate? Okay, so we generate a monolithic application. So you have an option to choose between a monolithic as well as a microservice application. So we generate a monolithic as well as a microservice application, whichever you want. So what do you do for Spring Boot 2? What are the specific steps that we have done in order to migrate to Spring Boot 2? Because as a generator, we call ourselves JHipster, which means we have to run faster with all the latest technologies that is coming out. In fact, we are supporting Angular 6 now. So if you take a look at Spring Boot 2, it got released a few months before, and we have migrated to Spring Boot 2, and now we are on Spring Boot 2.0.2. So what we've done here, of course, all you have known that in Spring Boot 2, it starts with Java 8+, or the baseline is moved to Java 8. And we have quite a few library upgrades. For example, the Tomcat and TimeLeaf, all these libraries got upgraded, and we also did the upgrades. And actuators endpoints were modified. We had a lot of security stuffs added to the actuator endpoints, custom stuffs, reactive stuffs, everything we also migrated. So let's go ahead and run a demo where we will generate a microservice application, monolith application, and then we'll create an entity for the JHipster, and then we try to see what it gives you by default as well as with the entity. Just before that, how many of you guys are full stack developers here? Okay, 5. Okay, only backend. Okay, how many of you use Kotlin here? Okay, we have 1. Oh, okay, great. So I just go to my terminal. Is everything visible for you guys? The back? It's fine? Yep. Okay. So I'm going to just create an application here. Let's call it a Spring app. Let me go inside Spring app. And then the first thing that I have to do is just type JHipster. So once you type JHipster, it asks you a bunch of questions. And with the help of those questions, it decides what it has to generate, and it generates for you. And as you can see here, I'm using the beta version of 5. 5 version is not yet released. It will be released soon. We are working on entire React support there. OK, so the first question it asks whether you want to create a monolith, a microservice application, or a gateway, or UAA server. How many of you used UAA server here? OK, UAA is user authorization and authentication server, which you can use it. JHipster also provides that stuff for you. But we'll go ahead and select the monolithic application. OK, the one difference between microservice application as well as the gateway is the gateway has a UI in it, while application will not have any UI. That's the only difference what we see before between microservice application and gateway. And if you want to know more about that talk, I have a workshop later today. If you guys want it, you can join there. So let me select monolithic application here. And then it asks for the name of the application. I'll go with the default. I call it a JHipster. And the Java package name. Followed by that, it asks you whether you want to add a registry. So registry is something like which is extensively used in microservice application for registering your services, which is extremely useful, and it also act as a health checker. But here, if for a monolithic application, you can even use JHipster registry, which is kind of a registry, but it talks more about the health of the application, as well as it helps you to monitor the application. If you want, you can go ahead and use, and it comes with just a Docker image. Okay, so I'm just going to select no here. And these are the 3 different type of authentication that we support. How many of you here use OAuth 2? Okay. We have quite a few hands showing up OAuth 2. We have a complete OAuth 2 support with Keycloak as well as with OIDC, which is by default it gets generated when you select OAuth 2 here. And we do have JWT authentication, which is commonly used, and also the session-based authentication. And it asks about the database. So how many of you are not using database here? Okay, great. Everybody is using a database. So we do have support for SQL and NoSQL databases. On NoSQL, we have these 3 databases support, which has Spring Data backend. So I'm just going ahead and use SQL here. And for a production, these are the different SQL databases that we support. I go ahead and use MySQL. And for development, how many of you use H2 here? Great. We have quite a few hands. It's ease for development. It's really ease, and you can boot it up and then shut down as your application and then remove all the things that you want, which makes it really flexible. So we'll go ahead and use H2 for our demo purpose here. And we also have Spring Cache abstraction. How many of you use Spring Cache abstraction here, like Hibernate, Infinispan, Hazelcast, something like that? So these are very important for the modern applications in order to give higher performance, and also use the cache as a second level stuff. So we'll go ahead and use EH cache. This is a default cache that we offer, but we do have something extra added to it, like Hazelcast or Infinispan. It generates a boilerplate stuff for you. And it also asks whether you want to use a second level cache in the Hibernate, which is common in the Spring world. And how many of you still using Maven here? Okay. Quite a few hands. And how many of you using Gradle here? Yeah, okay. As usual, we have lesser hands for Gradle. So let me go ahead and choose Maven here again. So we do have complete Gradle support. So if you want, you can go ahead and use Gradle there. And these are the extra options that we offer apart from the normal application. So whatever we have seen or a part of a normal application. But added to that, if you want to add in an Elasticsearch, it's something extra that you have to do. Also WebSockets, if you want a Spring WebSocket. So these are the list of things that we think, okay, everybody will not need this, but somebody will need it. So these are the extra options that you go ahead and choose. For example, you can add Elasticsearch to your application. You can add WebSockets. Also, you can use Apache Kafka asynchronous messaging and API first development, which I discussed before. So if you want to use any of them, you can go ahead and select them and use it. And this is an important question. Although the question seems very single-liner, this is where bulk of the work has been done because the entire front end is developed here. And you have an option to choose between Angular 6 and React. So let's go ahead and use Angular 6 now. And SaaS support. How many of you know about SaaS here? Okay, you have 1, 2 hands. Okay. And we do have a complete I18N support here, which means we support more than 29 to 30 languages. So the primary language, let me choose it in English, and you have a list of selection in which you can go ahead and choose whatever you want to choose, because we have a list of languages that are available. And as a team, we all focus more on the testing framework, because we do believe that we need to have higher coverage of testing. And over the past 4 months, we were like having 90% coverage in SonarQube, but now we were reduced to 85, and we are trying to improve on the testing percentage. So by default, the generated application will have more than 40K lines of code. And also with that 40K lines of code, we have like 85% of test coverage, which means most of the boilerplate stuff, or most of the things that which you have to work on, which you have to configure, is reduced. You have an entire application that is highly test covered available to you. So apart from normal JUnit as well as the Karma unit test, you do have option to choose between Gatling, Cucumber, and Protractor. Protractor for the front end, Cucumber and Gatling for the application testing. So if you want, you can go ahead and choose them. And we do have a marketplace. So we do have a lot of people asking for Kotlin-based generator. We do have a lot of people asking for Scala-based generator. So we do have a marketplace in which you can go ahead and create your own module and then plug that into the base generator that we have. So once you have done this, it generates an entire application for you. It runs yarn install, like it bundles up your front-end packages, and it also initializes a Git repository and shows and we will see what it's going to show us. So let's go ahead and open this in the IDE, if you call it. So if you have a look at here, it's a basic Spring Boot based project that is generated. You have an SRC folder, inside it you have a main, Java, and inside Java you have your packages listed. You have resources where you have configuration as well as your I18 and stuffs listed. And you have a web app where the entire Angular based application is getting generated. So yep, so this is what you have. And we also generate a Docker file here. How many of you use Docker here? Okay, we have few hands here. So we do generate an entire Docker file, so you don't need to worry about anything because the entire application is Docker capable. So just go ahead and run a single command which boots up the entire application with all the databases that you have configured, and it runs on a Docker environment. And you can just bundle this thing together and then put it in a Kubernetes or any environment, whatever you want. I'll also show you how to use Kubernetes here later. So yeah, so as you look here, we have an app YAML and then a Docker file for the entire application. So you have an entire application that is running on a Docker stuff, and then you have an app YAML, which is a Docker Compose file for booting up your app. You have a MySQL YAML file, which takes from MySQL image and then runs on it. And we do have a SonarQube YAML file, which helps you to run the code quality. So, but if you go ahead and see, it is nothing but a plain Spring Boot based application with all the configurations that you have selected has been pre-built and defined and configured for you. So it's a simple Spring Boot application with all those stuff that is there. So the application, so if you take a look at here, the application is started. So the code has been generated. Git has been initialized for init stuff. And all we have to do is just run maven-w, which boots up the application. And one more thing to notice here is like everything that we have generated, even for the front-end application or for the back-end application, everything is as per the best practices and standards that everybody follows. And one of the crucial thing here is like most of the application or most of the code that has been written here were from the original team members of there. Like for example, we have a Kubernetes generator which was entirely written by Ray from Google. You might have seen his talk yesterday or in his workshop. So most of the things that we see here has been written by the people who are actually part of the team, which really makes it that it is a best practice, as well as it has like the latest stuff that is embedded into it. So as you can see, the application is running, and you can also go ahead and see that it is running on Spring Boot 2.2 release. So that's it. So you have an application generated. You haven't done anything, just a bunch of answering questions. So you can go ahead and log into your application. Since we have used JWT, it has their authentication on it. So what you see here is like you have an administration module which has an user management. So you have a bunch of users that are generated for you. You have the entire metrics of the application where you see the JVM metrics as well as the cache statistics, garbage collection, and the service statistics, how your service is behaving, and also the data source statistics. So everything is by default, it has been generated. And you have a health part which shows you the health of the application, the disk space, and the database that is available. Audits, we use Java's audit API, which means like it also configures audits. So most of the entities that you see here will be audited. And how many of you use Swagger API here? Yep. We have 4 or 5 hands. So we also generate the entire Swagger endpoints with Swagger API and Swagger UI. So if you have a look here, this is an account resource that we have, and then we have this endpoint in account resource. You can go ahead and try it out. So everything is by default is generated. So you can go ahead and run it in your command line and then work on it. And we do have this entire logs that has been generated. So these are the logs. So logback XML actually with the Spring Boot new version, it also helps you to dynamically change or configure your logs. So you can go ahead and do that stuff here. And since we have used H2 database, so here you have an H2 database that is generated with bunch of default tables that are generated with a list of user authority, and all those stuffs. These are entirely built, and you just run your command like maven w, and it boots up the database. It does everything for you out of the box. So we do have, how many of you use Liquibase here? Okay, you have 1 hand going up. Oh, great, 2. Okay, so Liquibase is actually Git versioning system for your database, you can say. It really helps you to boot up the database and then run your database, all those commands, and then upgrade those stuffs, everything by easier. So we do have a complete Liquibase here. So this is a starting point of your Liquibase file, and then you have this initial XML that is getting generated. So this is an initial schema file. Here you see we are creating a table. Everything is an XML tag. You just have to modify this stuff if you want to change anything. We do provide an entity here. So let's go ahead and see how we can generate an entity for a JHipster app. So let me open a console, new console. So everything starts with JHipster command. So you can go ahead and say JHipster entity followed by a name. Let's call it as foo. So on click of it, it asks you a bunch of questions again. And if you answer the bunch of questions, and you will get an entity that is generated. So let's see what we can do here. So it asks, the first question is, do you want to add a field to your entity? Let us say yes, and just name it as bar. And you can have a bunch of different options to choose from. So you can go, just going to choose a string here, but you can choose integer, long, or date, or instant. Followed by any validation that you have to choose. Let me choose yes here. So you have this list of validation. Also, this list of validation is entirely depending on the previous selection that you have made, whether it's a string or an integer or stuff like that. And it also asks whether you want to add any more entities. Let me say no. And it also asks whether you want to add any relation to your database. So all the on-to-many or one-to-one mapping you can go ahead and define here. And it asks like whether you want to just create a REST controller and straight away go to a repository, or you want a service layer in between, or you want a service interface and service implementation in between. So it asks that question. So based on this question, it generates. Let me go ahead and select the default one. And finally, it asks what kind of pagination that you want to use. Since we are showing the entire UI, it also helps you to select a pagination. You don't want a pagination, you want some links, or you want some scrolls. So once it is done, this is one of the coolest things that that took a lot of time for us to do this stuff, but it really helps people a lot. Because what you see here is like we have a master XML in which everything gonna placed. So we already have that file available. And now since you're generating an entity again, it asks whether you want to override the file. So we give you different options here. You want to override, you don't want to override. You want to override this and all others using a command. Or you want to abort. Whatever you change, you have to roll it back. So all those options that we give, this command is extremely useful when you're upgrading your application. Suppose you have generated your entire application with JHipster 4 and you're moving to JHipster 5, you just go ahead and type JHipster upgrade. So once you have done the JHipster upgrade, it upgrades the entire stuff, and then it asks you whether you want to show the difference, you want to run all those commands. So let me go ahead and select A here, because I don't want to override. I want to override everything because I know that there are nothing custom configuration stuff that is written there. So once it is generated, so it runs the yarn build for the front end. And once it is done, your entire stuff is available. So let's go ahead and see once it is done. So as you can see here, a new file is generated. And this file has a table named foo, and an ID by default is generated. And you have a bar. And it also says constraints nullable false, which means it is how it is created in the database. So as you can go here and see, okay, once it is done. Okay, I'm just booting up the server for local development. So let's see what happens. So once it is done, you have this entity that is generated. But one thing is we haven't started the backend code of it, like the backend. We haven't restarted it, which means the database will not have that one. So when you try to create something, it goes and fails. But apart from that, everything starts. So let me go ahead and restart the backend. So here I'm just restarting the backend, which means the entire database will be generated. Like the database will be updated with the changes that we had. So now the application has been started. I'll just refresh. Hopefully it will work. Yep. So everything is done. So you have a view, edit, and entire basic CRUD operations there. So everything is done, everything is rooted. But you can say, okay, for one entity or two entity, it's much more simpler to just go ahead and type a JHipster entity, followed by the entity name, and then define the relationship. But when you have a complex data, when you have complex database structure, which means it's kind of tedious for you to run JHipster entity for every command, and if you have done some mistakes in it, you have to cut it out and then restart everything. And that is the main reason why we have JDL Studio here. So JDL Studio is something like JHipster Descriptive Language Studio, which helps you to generate entities by default. So it has a description language on itself. So for example, if you take a look at here, you have an entity called region, and you define all those entities table values. Inside here, you can also define enums. You can also define enums here. Followed by that, you can also define a relationship between the entities here using one-to-one, one-to-many. And once you have generated all this entity, this school diagram will be generated, data diagram. And then you can go ahead and save this one. So you can download this guy here. Then you can go ahead and copy this downloaded guy. So this is a file that we have downloaded now. And then go and copy it here. And then I can rename it here. So yeah, so I have renamed it here. So if you go ahead and see it here, this is a file that has been generated, the JHipster demo. So here you can see the list of files that are there. The entire thing, whatever you've seen, you can call an entity, and then you can say a table name followed by the list of values in it. So once you have done this, all you have to do is you have to tell the JHipster, okay, I have this entity file. I just have to run this stuff. So I just go ahead and run JHipster import JDL followed by the name of the entity. That's it. It generates an entire thing for you. And again, it asks the same question whether you want to override everything. Let me go ahead and say yes, override everything. So it overrides everything, and then it generates an entire package of application for you. So entire thing has been generated. So all your entities are added to it. Okay, I'll also restart the application here. So it says like entire application has been generated, like entities has been generated here. And I just booted up the application here. And now it will have all the list of entities that you have generated just now. So these are the entire list of entities that you have been generating. So it lists down everything here, so you can go ahead and create everything that you wanted here. I did a testing, so yeah. So you have everything, and if you have, say, you have a relationship, we also give you this option here, so it lists down the drop down. Currently we have ID here, but we basically expecting users to change it to name or something else, but just by default it will have an ID here, whichever you have been generated, and you can go ahead and select whatever you want here. So you can also say it as Spain, and then you can select this one, you save it, and then you have a link here which goes back to the country that you have. So this entire front end, irrespective of whatever you have added, we added here. Since we also said, okay, so we also have some extra options like pagination or using services, those kind of stuff, which will be defined here. So it says like pagination, so it says like infinite scroll. For paginate job, it says, okay, you go ahead and paginate this guy. And whether you want to use DTO, you can go ahead and use DTO with mapstruct. How many of you use mapstruct here? Okay, we have one hand here. Okay, so if you want to use mapstruct, you can go ahead and use the mappers and mapstruct. It also says, okay, all the services built with service IMPL. And it also says whether you want to add in some extra suffix to your application or extra prefix to your generator database table names, because sometimes you might need to add in an extra prefix to your database name. You can go ahead and add it there. Great. So that's it from the demo perspective. I'll also go ahead and create. I'll show you one more thing. How many of you are using Kubernetes here? Okay. How many of you have? So out of those two, do you guys feel writing a config YAML file or writing an entire Kubernetes configuration is kind of difficult? Okay. So we have an answer here. Okay. So in order to generate a Kubernetes file, it's as simple as running JHipster Kubernetes. So it first checks whether you have a Docker installed. So once you have Docker installed, it goes ahead and sees, okay, what kind of application. So it also asks you a bunch of questions. So it asks what kind of application for which you have to generate a Kubernetes. I'm going to say it's a monolithic application since that's what we have generated. And followed by that, it asks like in which root directory you have this thing. So I go ahead and select the basic one. And then so it goes back and checks in that directory how many JHipster applications are there. And it lists down those JHipster applications. So I'm going to select one application that is available here. Followed by that, it asks whether you want to add in any kind of metrics or Prometheus support. If you want, you can go ahead and add it. And it also asks for the Kubernetes namespace, followed by the Docker repository name. So let me give my name here. And it also asks what kind of command that you have to use in order to push your images to the repository. Let me use Docker push. And it also asks kind of Kubernetes related questions, whether you want to use load balancer and things like that. So once you have done that stuff, that's it. The entire application will be generated, like the entire configuration file will be generated. So if you go ahead and look at this, so these are the entire list of configuration file that will be generated. You have one file for the MySQL database. So it lists down the MySQL database. So it creates a MySQL database with the replicas and all those stuff. So this creates entire database for you. And then we do have this JHipster deployment stuff, which helps you to run your application and deploy it. You can specify the replicas and all those stuff. So this is just one config file in which everything is encompassed, which means if you have to deploy this entire thing, you just have to go ahead and run this command with your Kubernetes configuration done, and it will deploy the entire thing. And if you want to see this in live action, again, come to workshop where you will see it. So any questions so far? No questions? Great. Are we going good or bad? Okay. So moving to the code perspective, let me open that. So this is application that we have generated. So once you have generated an entity, you have this entire JSON file that is listed here. So you can go ahead and modify this thing. So this has the entire stuff. So you can go ahead and modify this thing if you have some minor things that has to be changed. And inside the source, we have this, again, the same configuration. So if you go ahead and see here, so you have the bunch of config files that are listed here. So the first thing is like async configuration for configuring your asynchronous stuff. And cache configuration, since you have selected cache, we also have cache configuration that is added here. So this cache configuration is again a Spring Boot based cache configuration. And as you can generate, as you see here, like there are a list of modification that has been happened because of the entities that we have generated. So we create a separate cache for each entity with their name, and we specify the type of cache that you have used. And again, you have this database configuration. So it has both MySQL as well as the H2 database configuration here. It has a default profile util, which takes care of all the profile stuffs and from your application YAML file and then puts it over here. We have an aspect configuration. So all the things that you necessarily need in order to configure your application. And one other thing is like the security configuration that you also have here, which helps you to configure the security of your applications. And here you can see entire thing is there, and you can also enable the CORS, CORS authentication stuff. We have just commented out that part in the YAML file. I can show you that. So you can also use HTTPS straightforward. We have the code ready for you. You just have to import your certificate there. Yep. So we also have the CORS here, which also helps you for your web application. And so this is a YAML file, the resource YAML file. It has like authentication, security authentication. Since we have used JWT, it expects a token. We have the token as well as a validity there. And we also generate a basic mail component. So you can go ahead and register, and then this uses JMX minute and it sends out mail. And the metrics which you have seen, the entire metrics of the application will also be captured. It will be really helpful when you're running as an admin and you want to know which part of your service is having some problem, which can be shown, which will be shown with here. And we also have this log stash. By default, you have this log stash as false. If you are going to use Elastic ELK stack and you need to send heartbeats to your ELK stack, you can go ahead and set true here. And all the files that has been generated, or JPA entities, will be here. So again, it's by default the JPA entity that will be generated. And all those we generate, when you just boot up your application, all those we generate automatically without asking you will have a JHI prefix, which helps you to determine these are the entities that are generated by default by the application itself. And of course, you have this repository, which extends a JPA repository. And for the import JDL command, we have used service and implementation, which means you have the service that is created and an implementation that is there. So you have all those things by default that is generated. And of course, the final thing is like the web resource. Entire resource is generated here. So you have an API request mapping, get mapping, and all those stuffs will be added in here. So any questions so far? Okay, great. So we have a reactive-based JHipster that is currently in construction. You can say that's why I've chosen this image. So yeah, so we are trying to do this stuff, and we have some problems with the reactive stuff because most of the SQL databases are not kind of reactive. So they are not at all reactive, and we have some reactive-based Couchbase or reactive-based MongoDB and things like that. So we are trying to first incorporate support only for those databases and create an entirely reactive-based application. But using an half reactive and not other half not reactive is not we do have in our hope now. And also one more thing is like, since when you're using reactive, your whole servlet API is getting changed which means you have a different servlet API for a reactive application as well as for the normal application. That is also kind of a blocker for us. So we said no for now. We are just constructing only for the databases that support reactive currently, and which is kind of in construction. We will do it. And for also to all those Kotlin fans, we have JHipster Kotlin coming up, which is a complete rewrite of the entire backend of the application. We are migrating it from Java to Kotlin. So we have this Kotlin-based generator, and we do support Blueprint. So Blueprint is kind of a technology which helps you to extend your base application and then rewrite the entire components or the components that you want to generate. And finally, yes, we have a workshop here, microservices, where we'll see how to deploy everything into Kubernetes, how to use Docker Compose files, and also generate a microservice gateway as well as a microservice application, which helps you to run your application much more faster. And finally, I think we have a copy of book here of mine at the My Taxi counter, you can say. Yep. So I have authored a book on full stack development with JHipster, where we take a monolith application, we generate a monolith application, add some entities towards it, and then followed by that, we also convert that entire monolithic application into a microservice application. Which makes sense because most of the time you need to first start with your monolithic application. That's how I feel. And then you understand the domain and logic that you're working on, so create your application, convert that into your microservices application. So in that way, we also take, in this book, we have discussed how you can migrate your monolith into your microservice application, and what are the things that you have to consider when you're doing it. What are the stuff JHipster offers in order to get started and move forward. And finally, we do have JHipster conference that is coming up, which is on June 21 at Paris, and where all the entire JHipster team is meeting for the very first time. So if you guys are interested, you can go ahead and see. You can come. And just before that, I also have one more thing to show you. So how many of you guys are using Docker Compose here? Okay, we have few people here using Docker Compose, and it's really helpful because with Docker Compose you can do everything in a single file and then run everything together. So I'll just show you guys one more thing. How do you create a Docker Compose file with JHipster? So you can go ahead here and then run JHipster docker-compose, which helps you to create the Docker Compose file. Again, it also asks you a list of questions. Let me say it's a monolithic application. Go back one step and then use the Spring app. Whether you want to use any of this thing, I say no for now. So yes, that's it. Like the Docker Compose file has been generated. Let's run this entire application on a Docker. So all it needs is you have to generate this Docker file. So let's go ahead and generate a Docker image of the file. So I'm just running. You can also skip this. So what it does is like it creates a Docker image of your entire application. So it's now creating a Docker image. Once the Docker image is created, you can go ahead and start this entire application in a single command in a production environment, all those stuff. So those are warnings. Don't worry about that stuff. You can do that stuff. And also one more thing to note here is like this is one single Docker Compose file. This is really helpful when you're doing your microservices because you have a lot of moving components that are here and there. And when you do a microservices approach, you need to have one single point where you have to start your entire application and check how it is running. Like for your integration server as well as for your CI/CD environment, it's really important. So that is one of the main reasons why we moved to Docker Compose. We also have Docker Compose files that are generated. And added to that, we also extensively support CI/CD configuration for Travis, GitLab CI, and many more CIs that are available out there. So it is really helpful in order to run your entire microservice application under one command and run everything together. It might take a while because let me stop that. So basically what it will do is it will create a Docker image. It will create a Docker image and then you can just go ahead and run. Let me show you that file. Prefer this. So it generates this Docker Compose file, entire Docker Compose file in a single stuff. And you can see here it uses the image of JHipster. It's JHipster is the name of the application that you've chosen there. So it uses that image. It chooses the production profile with Swagger enabled. And then it says this is a database in which it is going to connect. And followed by that, it also has the database added to it. So yes, that's it. So let's see whether yes, it is done. So all you have to do is we do provide a README. So it says like once you have done this, you just go to this compose location and run this command, which runs them in a Docker environment. Let me go to that file. So what it does is like it creates all the Docker Compose registries. So now the entire application will be run in Docker Compose, Docker files. So you can see here this both applications has been booted up here. So these are the two applications that we have started here. We can also go ahead and see the logs of the file. And hopefully it will be up in 8080. So I'm just checking the logs of the file. So this application is getting booted up. Yes, application is running. So now the entire application is running on Docker. This is externally useful when you're doing CI and CD stuffs, and it is really recommended when you do microservices with JHipster. So that's it, what I have to show in this demo. And any questions now? Okay, third time, no one says. Okay, happy hacking. Thank you very much, guys.